Human beings are impressionable, that's for certain. Most people want to find a place where they belong, something that offers them a purpose in life, somewhere they can be around like-minded people, all working towards a similar goal. But it's not always that simple. It's a lot about exclusivity. You may feel a lot more part of the group if the person letting people in the door is selective about who comes in. It's the same reason you might see a long line outside of a nightclub. Though a nightclub may not be your scene personally, what's inside is desirable. Exclusivity controls a great portion of our lives, from the university that we are applying to and hoping to get accepted in, and the job we're hoping to land afterwards. All of these places have an empty slot waiting for the perfect person. Not anybody can fit there. You have to work to achieve it. You have to be exactly what they're looking for. There are people who understand this aspect of human nature well, and like a skilled predator, they can spot you, recruit you, break you, and remake you. And before you know it, you've become someone totally different, someone who they want you to be. Cults. If you want to make an impact in the world, a cult is a pretty decent place to do it, but perhaps not always with your best interests in mind. Truth be told, cult leaders can make people do some pretty crazy things, like in the case of the Manson family. Charles Manson wasn't a well-educated man, having spent most of his life in prison, but he was an intelligent man. He was a philosopher and an artist, someone who would be easily looked up to in 1960s America. Hippies, all too willing to listen and live their lives enveloped in art and communal living, made perfect targets for Manson, who, behind the guise of a philosophical genius, was little more than a manipulative wolf in sheep's clothing. Manson had managed to assemble a commune of about 20 people, mostly women, and it was a pretty decent life. It was an enlightened life, a spiritually and psychologically fulfilling life, or at least that's what Manson said. Manson was a role model, a man to be looked up to, and that's exactly what his followers did. They often performed duties as servants for him. Having his followers so tightly around his finger, he would begin to question their core values and beliefs. He'd erase the world they once knew and rebuild it in his own image. In a dilapidated ranch away from society, of course, Charles Manson was their caretaker and overseer. Any new life experience had to pass through him first. And through persuasive coercion, he was able to turn some of his faithful followers into bloodthirsty monsters. Charles Manson spoke to his family and insisted that an apocalyptic race war was imminent and that they were the ones who had to initiate it. And he figured the best way to do that was to commit bloody, horrible murders to attract media attention and then blame it on black people. The terror brought on by Manson and a select few of his indoctrinated followers ended the decade of love in 1969, where 9 brutal murders were committed. Victims included actress Sharon Tate and coffee heiress Abigail Folger. Charles Manson wasn't one of the killers, though. No, he didn't even need to go. His followers weren't only doing as they were told, they were consumed by what they were told. Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant at the time, had been strung up and stabbed to death while she pleaded for the life of her unborn child. The word pig was written in her blood on her door. The word war was cut into another victim's abdomen. Manson had offered these people something that a lot of people look for in their life, a purpose, a way to stand out and make something your own. And unfortunately, that thing belonged to Manson the entire time. Charles Manson had brainwashed his followers, and brainwashing is most effective in an environment that the person trusts, or at least thinks they trust, like a yoga class, for instance. Which brings us to our next cult, Om Shinrikyo. The classes began in 1984 out of Tokyo, Japan. Members would come to take part in a unique style of yoga and meditation, led by its teacher, Shoko Asahara. By 1989, Shoko became more than just a yoga instructor. He began to infuse multiple religious ideologies into his teachings and made claim that he was Japan's fully enlightened Christ. who would not only save his followers from sin, but also from the inevitable Armageddon he had predicted. Though the cult had developed a bit of a tarnished reputation arising from claims that they would often keep members who tried to leave captive, or perhaps even murder them, the Japanese government still granted them official status as a religious organization. As the 1990s began, Shoko started to fill his believers' heads with warnings, claiming that the United States was about to attack Japan and initiate the end times. So Aum Shinrikyo began to stockpile weapons and military hardware, and in 1993, they had started developing sarin. Sarin is a colorless, odorless liquid classified as a weapon of mass destruction. A powerful nerve agent, it prevents proper operation of an enzyme that acts as the off switch for glands and muscles. Without an off switch, your glands and muscles are constantly stimulated. Symptoms of exposure will begin within a few seconds, and the body will secrete all liquids uncontrollably, from sweating to vomiting to diarrhea. Sarin is incredibly lethal and can kill you in just minutes. In 1995, Shoko had received word from one of his followers that police were planning to raid his facilities. So in order to distract the police from their activities, he had some of his members release sarin gas into the Tokyo subway system. 13 people died as a result of sarin exposure, 54 were injured, and nearly 1,000 people were affected by the gas. Thankfully, this didn't stop the police, who raided his properties regardless. As a result of the raid, police had discovered explosives, chemical and biological weapons such as anthrax and Ebola cultures, millions of dollars in cash and gold, LSD, methamphetamine, victims imprisoned in cells, a Russian military helicopter, and enough sarin to kill over 4 million people. Despite Shoko's claims that the evidence was manufactured by law enforcement, he was convicted and sentenced to death by hanging in 2004. And though he still lives, he's disassociated himself from the cult, which is still active today under a new name. Charles Manson and Shoko Asahara were able to take what could be considered a regular person and turn them into a murderer. But don't worry, not all cults are dangerous to outsiders. A lot of them keep the death and destruction in-house. The movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God was based in Uganda. Leaders believed that the apocalypse would come on January 1st of 2000 and believed so highly in keeping the Ten Commandments that they often wouldn't speak, as not to accidentally break the commandment of bearing false witness. The group was a breakaway Catholic cult that would often take in defrocked priests and nuns and give them positions of authority. January 1st of 2000 came and went, and there wasn't a single apocalypse in sight. So as not to shake the faith of their followers, leaders reset the date to March 17th of 2000. Hundreds of followers gathered at their church on that day. Shortly thereafter, the building erupted into flames and set ablaze all those within it. After the flames had died down, over 700 bodies were found, with strong evidence indicating that the act was not suicide, but murder. A number of the bodies had been poisoned, some had been strangled, and the rest burned alive. But it's not always about murder. Some cults avoid that at all costs, such as Heaven's Gate. Marshall Applewhite founded the Heaven's Gate cult in the 1970s. Like most other cults, the belief of an incoming apocalypse was forced upon its members. They believed that the only way to survive would be to ascend to the next level of existence, and if they all killed themselves at precisely the right moment, they would be taken to an alien spacecraft hiding behind a comet that had been passing by. On March 26th of 1997, Marshall Applewhite and 38 of his followers were all found dead in the luxurious mansion they had been staying in. All had died from ingesting poison and lie dead in their bunk beds, dressed identically with plastic bags over their heads. It's nice to be accepted into a place where everybody's considered equal. Everyone has a job and everybody's respected for doing their job. But sometimes equality isn't all what it seems to be. Founded in 1955 by Reverend Jim Jones, the People's Temple was firmly based on socialist principles. Jones believed his followers to be the purest communists, dedicated to live for socialism, total economic, racial, and social equality. Jones was a bit of a rock star as far as cult leaders go anyway. He had met with a number of high-level politicians, such as the Vice President and First Lady at the time. Though the cult had moved around quite a bit over the years, they eventually settled in South America in a place that they named Jonestown. But not all was well. Some members of the cult decided that That kind of lifestyle just wasn't for them, and they wanted to leave. And at that point, Jim Jones believed he had failed. Congressman Leo Ryan, accompanied by members of the media and some concerned relatives of the People's Temple's members, had gone to visit Jonestown as part of a government investigation. Jones was reluctant, but eventually welcomed them. When Ryan had arrived, one of the members of the People's Temple had slipped an NBC correspondent a note. The note read, "Please help me get out of Jonestown," and included his wife's name. And as time went on, other people chose to defect from the People's Temple as well. So Ryan had gathered up the defectors and decided to take them home. Jones had sent one of his followers to pose as a defector, and as the plane was moving along down the runway, he withdrew a gun and began firing at all the occupants on board. Thankfully, he was disarmed, but other members of the People's Temple were on the ground and opened fire themselves, and Leo Ryan was killed along with 4 other occupants. The next day, Jones called a meeting and had aides fill a large metal vat with Flavor Aid drink mix and a number of deadly chemicals. He told his followers what had happened and that they must commit revolutionary suicide, or else their children would be captured, tortured, and converted to fascism. Many members willingly drank the concoction, but as they started to die, others began to erupt into panic. A number of members were taken and forced to consume the poison, while some others managed to get away. At the end of it all, over 900 lie dead on the ground, men, women, and children. Jim Jones died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. It would be the greatest loss of American life in a deliberate act until September 11th. So you see, exclusivity can be quite a powerful thing. We all want something that makes us special, but if to be special means to be better, I'm not quite sure that any of these people found what they were looking for. So be wary of who you consider a role model, and always guard your mind. You never know when another person might want to find more use in it than you do. Remember, you may not believe it, but anything is possible in a world so seriously strange. I'm Rob Dyke, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Please show the artists of this series some support by subscribing to our YouTube channel linked in the description below. Also, don't forget to click subscribe on screen now to subscribe to my channel, because you won't want to miss what's next.